I'm a mechanical engineer, and I started mechanical engineering in 1979, so it's 40-something years of playing as a mechanical engineer. And it was something I always wanted to do. Well, not always. When I was 7, I wanted to be a spaceman or maybe a cowboy. Grew out of that. I decided I wanted to be an engineer, and I always wanted to be a mechanical engineer because stuff moves if you're a mechanical engineer. And if you're a structural engineer, you design something and it just sits there, and that just seemed boring somehow. So that's my story on being a mechanical engineer. My first job as an engineer was in a pulp mill when I graduated. Previous to that, I had worked in some summer jobs as a mine mechanic in an underground mine, and that's when I decided I didn't want to be a geotechnical engineer for sure, and I didn't want to work underground. But I went to work in a pulp mill as a maintenance engineer, and it was a good job, but I got bored after a couple of years because it was always the same people telling you the same reasons why you couldn't do whatever brilliant idea I had at that day. And so I went looking for another job. I also looked at the pulp mill industry and thought it wasn't going to be a growth industry in BC for sure. I ended up getting a job with Crippen Consultants. I think a challenging project for me was the Anish's Swing Bridge, which I did really early in my career with Crippen. And it was challenging because I was a junior engineer and I didn't actually know what a swing bridge, how it worked. And so technically I had a really good time trying to figure out how to do it. The Anish's Swing Bridge was interesting because typically swing bridges swing horizontally and go back and forth like that. And this one actually, what it does before it swings is it rocks and then it swings. And by doing that, you don't actually have to have hydraulics on both ends of the bridge. You can only have to have them on one end of the bridge. So we saved some equipment. The other thing was that the bridge actually had road on one side and rail on the other side. So the whole bridge actually warps because rail loads are much higher than road loads. So there was a lot of discussion and a lot of work to make sure that the bridge would actually warp properly when you let go, when you drop the blocks out and before you swing it. So it was just a really challenging and interesting project from that perspective. I went from calculators to computers to sophisticated computer modeling, which I think was a significant change. I started as well when drafting was done with pens and pencils on paper. And then it became CAD, and then it became modeling from CAD, and then printing, coordinating that directly into the BIM modeling, etc. So there's been huge technological changes in the time that I've been playing as an engineer. But still, there's the issues with people. People have to understand what they're doing, and what I see sometimes is that, in particular, if you have to draw it with a pencil and paper, or if you have to figure it out simplistically, you get a better understanding sometimes before you actually go to some of these other models. So sometimes it's actually quicker with a pencil and paper than it is with a computer or technology. Ask questions. If you don't understand why they're telling you something, ask questions. Because you may have a better idea, or you may have an idea that they haven't thought of, or you may be technologically more up to date, so I can say that with gray hair, than someone else. And if you can give them that new idea, that sometimes turns out to be the way that the problem can be solved. So I think that's one thing. The other thing I would suggest is that have fun. It has to be fun. If you don't enjoy it, you shouldn't be doing it. Make sure that you get an opportunity to go and see your mistakes built. Because when you design something, and then someone else out in the world builds it, go and see it if you have the chance. Go to site, not just to see what you designed, but to see what everybody else designed. And go, oh, that was a really good idea. Why didn't I think of that? I better remember that for the future. Learn a little bit about the disciplines that you are not. Because if you actually understand a little bit about geotech and a little bit about civil and a little bit about structural and a little bit about electrical, right, you're more valuable because you can interact with those groups better. Don't be afraid to put out ideas which seem a little bit off the wall to start with. We did a project where the client asked us to take out an intake tower in an old dam It was a latticework intake steel structure stuck in a bit out in the reservoir. And they wanted to take it out, and to get to it, they'd have to rebuild a road, bring in a very large crane, bring in a barge, put the crane on the barge, go out and take it apart with the crane, and then take everything out and then take apart the road. So it would be very expensive. And we said to them, after they had costed that, we said, well, why don't you take a helicopter and just lift it out of the lake and fly it out and then dismantle it off-site? And that's what they eventually did, is we brought some divers in, which we could bring in on a Jeep, and it was pretty easy to get in. Having ideas that seem off the wall to start with, you have to brainstorm them and think about them. And most of them don't work out, but occasionally you get something that sends somebody down a path that does become the solution, the effective solution. If you can become in a position where you have a relationship with clients who call you to get your firm, but they are also looking for you, they have that relationship with you, that's really important. It helps your longevity in the business, it helps the company, and it is of great value to all parties, right? So if you can build that relationship with your clients, that's great. Also, I think goes back to the comment I made earlier, which is going to site. Go to see your clients, go to site, see what they're doing, find out what their projects are. When you go and do something, I went on a sales call one time and tried to sell a particular client in Peru a hydroelectric design opportunity. And I asked the question that you should always ask is, what else do you have that you need? What other projects are you looking for? And they said that they had bought a second-hand milk processing plant from the US, and they needed help in reassembling it. And at that point in time, we had an industrial division in Toronto, and lo and behold, we ended up getting a job helping them set up a milk plant. Now, I went to sell them a hydroelectric plant, and I sold them a milk plant. But you got to ask the question, what is it you need help with? Because that's a consultant's job.